Okay, so thank you very much for coming this afternoon, and I see some folks who've already used the platform and probably know how to use it more effectively than I did. But I wanted to tell a little story about sort of how this came about and sort of the ideas of using gamification for medical education, and then interestingly all the data that we have when we do things this way and how we can analyze those data to maybe look at how we're teaching and plan things out differently. So the first thing we're going to talk about is sort of a couple of threads coalescing, the first game we ran, and sort of what we did next. So this story kind of starts in 2003. The ACGME put in guidelines for work hour restrictions. And it was a very interesting time. I was actually a chief resident when this happened, and I was the first person in charge of implementing it. And everybody just had a wonderful schedule that would solve all our issues. And boy, I'd looked through so many schedules, and the reality was that all of these schedules had to do with how we're going to cover clinical services. But the thing that nobody was changing or adjusting was how are we educating folks. So I can tell you, having trained before this time in internal medicine, if I didn't understand something, I could ask, can you explain that to me again? And my professor would go and he'd sort of diagram it again, and as many times as I needed, because we had the time. We were going to be there all, we were going to be there all day. We're going to work 120 hours that week. It's okay, spending a lot of time. And there's downsides to that, but one of the positives in terms of education was that there was always time for education. When the work hour restrictions came about, I think it's been a healthy and a good thing for patient care, but I don't think we've done a good enough job adjusting our education to that new reality. So education suffers, and you find residents making decisions. I got to go and cover this service, and I got to make sure that I do my discharge for this person who's going home, so I'm just going to skip conference, or I'm not going to go to this teaching session. And ultimately, less teaching happens. So this was sort of our sense that the work hour restrictions were having some impact. So we started talking about that, and we started looking at our own behavior. So 2003, initial work hour restrictions. 2011, further restrictions get put in place. And around 2011, we start talking about this and reflecting on what we're doing on the wards. And we really started wondering, has this affected our teaching? How have we adapted anywhere? Are there any adverse effects? And really noticed that going from room to room, I was looking at my watch, and I was thinking, I've got to get these residents out of here by 1. And I would say, boy, look at this wonderful pattern of illness that's right here. I should teach about that. But, oh, I got to get these 2 out of here by 1 because they've been here overnight and I can't do it. I'll just do it tomorrow. But then tomorrow, people were either off or they were in clinic or we couldn't get to it because something else happened. And it felt like by the end of the week, there was all this stack of missed opportunities for teaching. And we, talking to some other of my colleagues, we all felt like we were just shortchanging this generation of trainees in a way that certainly we weren't shortchanged. So we decided to say, is this just our impression? Is this just a couple of attendings feeling this way? How do the residents feel? So we put a couple of focus groups together, and we started asking sort of senior residents and junior residents about, hey, what's your reality? How does this affect your learning? So specifically, how does it affect, and here's some of the comments. You have things like, it's the same amount of work, there's less time to put into it, something's got to give. So the teaching aspect just gets lost in the shuffle. We found that the residents themselves, the third-year resident, was now having to roll up their sleeves and do a lot of frontline work and wasn't investing that time in teaching the first-year residents. So that not only were we feeling that as attendings that we were doing a good job teaching, but the third-year residents were getting their time squeezed and they weren't teaching the first-year residents as much. So we realized that everybody was sort of having this issue. We published these data and we basically said there's unintended consequence here, guys. We're not learning, they're not learning. So here we go. Now the second thread that coalesces is now we're on rounds, and I'm on a team, and I'm the senior guy, and I've got 2 interns, and each one of them has half the patients. And when this person is presenting patients to me, this person is looking on their phone. Now I know that they're looking on their phone, and I know even though they're acting like they're looking up the disease that we're talking about, I know that's not true. And I know it isn't true because in 2001, when I was on rounds and I had a Palm Pilot, I made an experiment of figuring out what game I could play without getting caught. And I learned a lot. You cannot play Pac-Man or Space Invaders and hope you won't get caught. Things get very intense. The ghosts corner you. You get very anxious. People realize there is nothing that exciting that you can be looking up. There's no dose that exciting. So people would say, like, are you really looking up the dose for that antibiotic? Or are you doing something else? No, I'm looking up this dose for this antibiotic. So I got busted all the time until I found blackjack. Let me tell you, you can play blackjack all day and seem very serious. You say, what's that? Let me look that up. Hit me. Hit me. I can't seem to find it. Hit me. Oh, look at that. Blackjack. 500 milligrams. Now, I know that they're not playing Pac-Man, but I know that they're on Facebook. And I know that they're putting status updates like, most boring rounds ever. And I know it, and I'm looking at them, and I don't want to say anything because I got all this guilt from 2001. But I know that they're using their phone. So, okay, so you want to be on your phones? Okay, you want to be on your phones. So we started thinking about gamification. And gamification was an interesting thing to read about. Now, have you ever been studying for what feels like 3 hours and then realize it's only been 5 minutes? Does that happen to any of you? But have you ever been playing a game for 3 hours and it's felt like 5 minutes? So how can this be? This sort of, this different perception of time. And gamification would say that basically when we're engaged in an activity, we have a phase where we're getting information, we're gathering data, then there's sort of some kind of test where we act on that data, and then we get some feedback. You know, now in an academic classroom, that's a couple of weeks of sitting through lectures. There's a test, which is a test, and then you've got your grade, which is your feedback. Now, if you think about Monopoly, I'm collecting information of all of your turns, and then it's my test. I'm rolling the die, and then I'm making a decision, and I'm immediately seeing the consequences by what you did on the game board. So that cycle of gather data, act on data, receive feedback occurs in seconds in a game, occurs in weeks in our classrooms. And that's what gets our attention. Because when that cycle happens in accelerated fashion, in a game fashion, then you get continuously re-engaged. But the way that we teach, often it takes a long time to complete that cycle, and that's why it feels so long. So gamification then has been used in a lot of settings, social, economical, educational environments, to try to enhance engagement. So we started thinking about, well, wait a second, could we use this for education? And could we do something to put on the phones of all of these residents who want to be on their phones all the time? And could we then teach them in a different way, because we don't have time to put them in the room and lecture them anymore, because they have to be out there doing patient care with their reduced work hours so that people can be healthy and can get home. So we came up with this application. We came up with Kaizen. And Kaizen is a word that comes from the Japanese literature about auto plants, and it really is this philosophy of incremental improvement. So it would say that if we're all at the assembly line, each one of us has a responsibility every day, not just to do our job, but to look for opportunities to improve how we do our job and to sort of find a better way to do things. I thought that this sounded a lot like what we are always telling our students, which is you have to be a lifelong learner. You have to get better every day. No matter how good you are today, if I come see you a week from now, you got to be better at your job. That's what we want from our graduates. So then we decided we named this Kaizen, and we really talked about, okay, what are some of the elements of gamification that we can bring in? So there's got to be a clearly defined goal. I want to get the most points. What are the rules to play the game? There's got to be a feedback system where you can track progress and identify sort of how you're doing compared to others. Participation has to be voluntary, which was interesting. Now we're letting the residents play if you want to. There's got to be intrinsic rewards and extrinsic rewards. Different things motivate different people. So intrinsic rewards, some people will be just happy because they're getting better, they're acquiring knowledge, they're sort of polishing their skills, they're problem solving, there's socialization where they're interacting with other people, and there's extrinsic rewards like my reputation. I'm at the top of the leaderboard, or I got this many points, this many badges, this many levels, I'm doing better than you're doing. So you basically build software and you try to hang as many behavioral hooks on it to see if you get your audience to sort of play. So we went ahead and we decided to build our game. I'll show you some screenshots here in a minute. We decided to make our questions concise. So the game basically consists of questions that you'll see. They can be either picture-based, be a video, be just text as a multiple choice question. We want them to be focused. We want you to start writing your question with what you want to teach in mind. So we always talked about sort of aerodynamic questions. Do you want them to use humor, use mnemonics, do things to sort of make people laugh and keep them engaged? And we got image support from a company called Visual DX that has an incredible library of images that we could use. And we talked with our internal medicine program, which graciously agreed to let us do an initial trial. Now I'm going to show you some data from this initial trial in 2012. We did 3 answers. So the game does many things. When you get an answer correct, you get a certain amount of points. You can make questions that are timed. So if you answer the questions within 60 seconds, you toggle how much time you want to give, you'll get double the points. So this was the issue because we had a lot of people coming back and saying, well, I'm answering all my questions with what I know, but I know that, Billy is over there looking up the answers. Well, Billy looking up the answers is what we call studying. So I'm not sure I have a problem with that. However, I do want to reward the fact that you're trying to do it. So we came up with timed questions as sort of a way so that you can make any question timed, and that way, you can get double the points if you answer it within the time limit. If not, you still get some points. Hot streaks are depending how many questions can you get correct in a row. So you set parameters. At 15 questions and at 30 questions, I'm going to give you a hot streak badge. Marathon badges, these reward consistency. You showed up every day and you did your questions within 24 hours of them being posted. Whether you got them correct or incorrect, we don't care. We just care that you logged in, that you played, that you're on point, and that you're engaged. So here's sort of a leaderboard, how it looked. We made it web-based so that you could access it across any device that had a web connection. We allowed people to put in aliases, which is always, you realize how much pop culture is out there. So this is me. I play as Pus Patrol because I'm an infectious disease guy. One of my favorite students is one of Kathy Roach and Nancy Wingo's students who calls himself Florence Nightingale, which is a male nursing student. And you find out people come up with some really clever names. So you've got your rank when you're playing. What's your score? This is your hot streak. How many questions in a row have you got incorrect? And how many days in a row have you sort of showed up and done your work? So as you achieve different scores, you unlock different level badges. So here's, for example, a Petri dish badge, which is where the infectious disease game would be the first badge. Your knowledge, and you can put in the badge and you put in sort of the associated text. So you can upload badges to the game. That's the humor of whatever discipline you're using. There's a lot of humor out there that makes no sense to me. There's humor that I find hilarious. The nursing game, again, has one badge, which is literally a urinal, and it says "you're in the game," which for some reason, I find that hilarious. And sometimes I'll literally sit in my office and bring up that badge and just laugh. I'll go do something else. So we enlisted these great educators. We asked the residents. We went and we looked at the data about who the residents said, these are the best teachers. So we went ahead and we went to those folks and we just said, hey, if you had 10 things that you want me as a general internist to know about your specialty, what would those 10 things be? And can you help us and write 10 questions for them? So our faculty was incredibly generous. They gave us a bunch of questions. And we sort of gave them these things, and we sort of made this initial game to be 2 questions a day. You can see that after you do your question, you'll get sort of the answer, and you'll get a quick explanation, which is sort of the learning that will take place. And then you can sort of rate the questions. So over time, we can see how our questions are doing and sort of thread out different questions. When we did our focus groups, we found out that the residents wanted to play in teams. So again, intrinsic and extrinsic rewards. Some of the residents that were more interested in extrinsic rewards, they wanted to be at the top of that leaderboard, and they just wanted to beat everyone. They wanted to have the biggest hot streak. They wanted to get the longest marathon. These are the people that write you an email at 3 a.m. Your question sucks. Here's 10 articles why you're wrong. And you think to yourself, it's 3 a.m. Why are you writing me at this time? But you literally will find those people because they are the ones that are going to get really upset that their hot streak is broken. But again, that's called studying, which is great, which they might not have been doing otherwise. But some of the residents were more interested in the intrinsic reward. They were the ones who wanted to be part of a team. For them, they were going to show up and do their questions if their teammates were doing their questions. And that's what motivated them. They didn't care about being on the leaderboard. They cared about improving personally, but they would log in to sort of support their peers and make their team score the best that their team could be doing. So it was very interesting because you think that you have this one template of highly competitive people, in medicine, but you actually have all of these diverse personalities stuck in there, and you need to find a way to appeal to multiple ones. Your hot streak badges, you must forgive some infectious disease humor. Sort of your on fire badge, and then you have sort of your marathon badge, which is again your sort of consistency. And whenever you hit these thresholds, then you get extra points, and you get the badge, and it shows up in your game as you play. So that's basically the game. You know, we present you with questions, you set up your game, you put in your badges, and off you go. This is the results of the first game we ever ran. So this was in the internal medicine program. We had 3 rounds, 6 weeks, 6 weeks, and 8 weeks. 92 residents played the first round. 71% of all questions were answered. 90 residents played that second round with 69% of all questions answered. And here was interesting because you learn things. We thought that towards the end of the year, they're closer to their board exam, so surely they're going to do more questions because they're going to be studying. We found out that is exactly the opposite. This is the time of year where they're thinking, I got to move to Chicago to go do cardiology. How do I get an apartment in Chicago? So they weren't doing questions at that rate this time of year, so we see our attendance drop. And again, you start sort of seeing, okay, this is when I can actually teach my students, and this is when I have to hit them with the information. But in total, over these 20 weeks, 16,427 questions were completed by these residents. So I want you to think for a minute that each one of these questions is followed with that teaching vignette. And I want you to think of yourself sitting in the ward with a team of students around you when you recognize a disease pattern and when you say, but let me teach you this point that I want you to take away from this case. How many careers to reach 16,427? So this was 16,427 teaching interactions that would not have occurred otherwise in the way that we were teaching traditionally.
Were they different questions or questions, 16,000 different questions?
No.
No.
Globally. There was about 400 questions, everybody doing them, counting them, that's sort of how much. Now, here's when the questions were done. Between 5 p.m. and 8 a.m. the next morning, 53% of the questions were done during that time. Net their own time. On the weekends, almost 30% of our questions done on Saturdays and Sundays. Folks, we need some kind of social intervention for our internal medicine resident. We got to help them get out. We got to like invite them to parties. We got to do something for them. This is the fanning the flames effect. So about once a week, I would sit at the computer and I would concoct an email where I would make fun of every team that was there. I would say, boy, look at team number 1. Those folks right there, those folks are really good. But team 2, I'm not sure they can read and write. Look at where they are on the leaderboard. What's going on over here, guys? Team 2 would just immediately, that spike was team 2. Bang! How dare you? So these dotted lines represent every time we send an email, and these are sort of the corresponding spikes. You can see that it's statistically significant in our first 2 rounds. In the 3rd round, there's a trend towards it, but again, I think here's where we sort of had our sample size dip, but you can still see those spikes, though they're a little bit smaller with the sample size. But you've got to engage your audience. You've got to sort of prod them every once in a while and say, hey guys, how you doing? Let's look at this game. We started modeling attrition. When do we lose players? Why do we lose players? We had 3 rounds. If your player skips that first round and starts in that second round, they're 12 times as likely not to stick around. They're just not going to stick around. You didn't engage them early. They don't understand what's going on. Their peers are playing, but they're sort of checked out. They never checked in. You've got to get them to start playing right off the bat. So you got to make this feel like an event. You got to let them know that it's coming. You got to start it right off the bat. You got to get people engaged. And then during that first round, the more questions you completed in that first round, the deeper you went into that first round was 60 questions. The person who went to question 50 was much more likely to stick around and come back in rounds 2 and 3 than the person the person who only went 30 questions deep. So you've got to get him to play early, and you've got to get him to play that first round to completion. We started thinking about a way to test retention of knowledge. So what we started doing is, since we had 3 rounds, we resurrected questions from rounds 1 and 2 in round 3. And then we looked at the diet of someone who had gotten the first time they saw that question wrong, how much more likely were they to get it correct the second time? And we saw a difference. Overall, there's about 12% higher chance you got it correct the second time. If it's a question from round 1, which is within 6 months, 10% increase. If it's a question from 3 months ago in round 2, about a 17% increase. So this really speaks a little bit to retention of knowledge And speaking with our colleagues in the School of Education, there's this theory of decay of knowledge that when I learn something, I immediately begin to forget it. So again, now imagine if I'm sitting here and I have a suite of questions that I use every year, and I know that I need to give you a reminder every X amount of time on the physiology of the kidney. Now you can really plan this augmentation to your course using these types of tools to keep that knowledge fresh in your learners. Again, it gives us different tools and a different way to think about how we're educating. So, boy, we had people coming to ask us, hey, can we run a game? Can we run a game? Can we run a game? And around that time, we meet our colleagues from the School of Nursing here, Nancy Wingo and Kathy Roach, who sort of took this to a whole other level. So they went to the School of Nursing and they put it in about 6 programs, or undergraduate programs, postgraduate programs. I'll let them speak here in just a minute about some of their experience with it. But then basically we couldn't keep up with demand. Initially when we did this, the CCTS allowed us to have a little bit of space on one of their servers and one of their programmers. Literally had the server space to handle 5 concurrent users. And people would write questions all the time. Hey, I think the game is down. And they'd sort of text me or something, and I'd text them back, you know, it's probably your internet, just try again. And they say, oh, you're right, it worked this time. No, they were right. There was more than 5 people playing at that moment, so we couldn't use it. So eventually, at this point now, we write an HSFGF grant, we get some funding, we buy a server so that we can handle multiple games. And we start building tools so that we can then have a conversation with folks when they say, hey, we want to run a game. We say, well, here's a set of keys, and go ahead and run and build your game. So these are some pictures of the what we call the Build-A-Bear for the Build-A-Bear workshop in the mall. And basically, we set up a set of tools. Here's sort of where, you know, we enhanced our servers, we redid the front end, we had this team landing and communications page. You have this sort of dashboard where you can see who your players, what % participation do they have, how are each teams doing, what are their badges. You can sort of add questions, and you can create tags for your questions so you can later search for them. And now things begin to get very interesting, because now we say, well, wait a second, maybe we should take away all the walls and make this just a library of questions. So when OBGYN built the game and internal medicine built the game, and it turns out that internal medicine had 20 women's health questions. Well, OBGYN looked at those questions and said, these questions are great. They're the basics for our people. We're going to go ahead and put them in our game. And all of a sudden, half their questions for the first game were filled out. And internal medicine said, hey, this OBGYN stuff, a lot of it is pretty specialized, but there's a good 25% of it that's really good that I need my residents to know. And then they started borrowing those questions. So we said, let's just make it a library. Anybody can use anybody's questions. Just go in there and share. So you can use this, but you will share your questions. The badges, we also made them shareable. So there's different folks, have different people on town that are sort of qualified and can draw. Brian Wallace back there is a great artist. He's made a ton of great badges. And now we can all have access to the badges that Brian Wallace has built. So they're there. So it's the concept of a library. You get a set of keys, but you're in a community where all of this stuff is pooled and shared. Things happened. Over 87 games were run. There's about 15 disciplines that engaged. Collectively, there was 5,800 users as of around 2 months ago, and a total of 204,000 individual questions have been answered by that time. Other GME programs did this. OBGYN, the emergency department, surgery, ENT. I've got some data from ENT that I haven't looked at this week, where I think their board scores this year were better than their board scores on the years before when they didn't use Kaizen to augment their teaching. I've just received that yesterday. I haven't had a chance to look at it too in depth, but the School of Business started using it to connect with their alumni after events. So something really weird started happening, which is basically everybody had better ideas on how to use this than I did. In the Introduction for Clinical Medicine course for our medical school had these weekly quizzes that the students just dreaded. Every year when they fill out their survey, they said, the course was fine, but this thing is torture. This is a terrible thing you're making me do with these weekly quizzes. So they did away with it. And they sort of put up questions, they put them in teams, and they had them compete with each other. Now they love it. And now every week they come in and they say, ha-ha, our team is better than your team. You guys can't listen to heart sounds like we can. Okay, whatever. You're doing your work. It's called doing your homework. Dentistry started doing this, but dentistry did something really cool. They gave people a Kaizen game, and they looked at their results and they said, but look, we're doing really awesome on these 4 topics, but we're really below the mean on these other 4. So our board review series, we're going to, instead of doing a lecture on each of these topics, we're going to do 2 lectures on each of these that we're not so great at. And the ones that we're good at, we're good at. Don't worry about it. So it's an interesting way where they targeted their board review based on running this game ahead of time to see how their people were doing. They sort of, the American Dental Education Association has sort of spoken about this, and Michelle Robinson is working on a manuscript about this. But it really, I mean, they love it. They say, okay, this is a great way to sort of target education. The emergency department started using this to train rural healthcare practitioners in Kenya, who you have to spend a lot of money to bring to a central location to sit through a bunch of lectures. They basically said, no, we're going to send you questions. You can do them. The guidelines change. You don't have to wait till we have a national meeting a year from now. You can we can start asking you questions about that are going to teach you about how the guidelines change, and you can start practicing with better information today. So it was interesting. The School of Public Health started using this to prove competencies. Their accrediting body requires their students to have certain competencies. So when the accrediting body says, but how do I know that your students meet these competencies? Well, the School of Public Health says, well, look, they passed the course. No, but this is not good enough. So what they did is they offered a scholarship, and whoever wins gets a couple of $1,000s taken off their tuition, and then everybody is vying for that scholarship. Everybody is doing over a certain threshold, and when they're asked for data on whether how do I know your students are meeting the competency, they say, because look at this competition and look at the level at which everybody's performing. We're talking with some folks in nursing about using this to educate underserved populations with chronic illness. Imagine if we make modules for diabetes education in conjunction with the people that we serve, and we come up with questions. You know, to me, this goes back to an interesting conversation I had with a young man with psoriasis. So I said, you know, well, let me teach you about psoriasis. And I wanted to tell him about all these little things about psoriasis that I think are important. And later on, I met him, and he said, you know what you didn't tell me about psoriasis? He says, I ride my bike to work, and because of the friction, now I have a bunch of lesions in my buttocks, and it's been very uncomfortable. You should have told me not to ride my bike to work. I had no idea. I would have never thought of that. That's never been in the textbook for me. But man, have I told anybody that I've ever seen with psoriasis, watch out riding a bike, buddy. That's going to be a problem. But I wouldn't have known that. So I think in our chronic illnesses, there's things that the people that we serve know, and there's things that I want them to know from my perspective. I want to know about the pathophysiology of and why this treatment is more effective and why you need to take your pills all the time. But how about what they know that I don't know that they also think is important? So this is sort of what we're hoping to accomplish with that. In the School of Nursing, I'll step back and allow our colleagues to talk a little bit about what their experience has been like.
I met James at a...
Hang on just a second. Can you hand her that mic? It's not yours, James, not yours.
Nope.
And just unmute it. That way everybody online, because we have a lot of people online. So
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, I met James at a journal club, and right after I saw his invigorating talk about Kaizen, first of all, I love games. I went back and I met with Nancy Wingo, and I go, we need to do this at the School of Nursing. This is going to be so fun. So we took a lot of time to figure it out and get it ready for our incoming first semester nursing school students in 2015. And I created all the teams based on their clinical groups, but I named them fun names like the Trendelenburgs and the, I can't even remember, but they had to come up with their own aliases, and then we started the game. And we figured out, just like you said with the School of Dentistry, where we saw holes, we realized that our students needed some more experience with medical calculations. They needed to figure out how to do doses. So we came up with MedCal Monday. So every Monday they got a medical calculation question that they had to solve. And then retention of knowledge. So we would do hashtag Throwback Thursday. So every Thursday was a question that they'd already had before. So we were able to do that. And then we had Fun Fact Friday or Fun with Faculty Friday that got them to know the faculty, just kind of, you know, what's Dr. Roach's favorite color or something not Kaizen related. And we did that. I am amazed at the creativity of our students. If we just give them the opportunity to shine, it was really quite awesome. So this semester, I'm starting my, I don't know, whatever game with my second semester students. But what I love about Kaizen is you can change it up every time. You can always do something new with it, whatever, because there's no right or wrong with it. You can just do whatever you want. And so this time I'm letting my second semester students form their own teams pick who they want to play with rather than me putting them into a team and calling them the Trendelenburgs and talking smack, like only you can reverse your position on the leaderboard, Trendelenburgs. And so I let them come up with their own teams and their own names, and we're just now starting that. They are so excited about that. So it's giving them some autonomy and letting them be engaged at a level that they want to and form their own teams, because a lot of times, sometimes they get on a team that I place them on and other participants aren't playing and they don't win the pizza party and they get all went. So now they have a chance. Now they have a chance to pick their own teams and play, and now I'm going to see who's the winner. So I'm really excited about that.
Oh, thank you. So, again, people just keep thinking of better ways to use this than I ever thought of. And here's some data from one of the nursing games. Again, now we did sort of this generalized linear mixed models, this GLIMIX, and we sort of looked at retention of knowledge, and we found that, again, there is greater retention of knowledge in nursing students with the different sort of set analytic techniques. So now we've seen this in a couple of games. One thing we were able to do in the nursing game that we're looking at here was that we consented all the students. So we have sort of FERPA is kind of the HIPAA equivalent in education, and we need their permission to be able to use like their exam scores. So now we're looking at play style, and what we calculated a player efficiency rating, which is sort of comes from watching too much basketball and thinking about player efficiency ratings. But it's kind of a global reflection of player effectiveness, where we've basically your accuracy, your consistency, how much of the season you played, and your timeliness, time between when the question was posted to when it was answered, because we know that that's the way that you're going to get the most out of the game. We calculate a higher player efficiency rating for you, and we distributed the class into tertiles. You can see that the highest tertile for player efficiency rating really outperformed their peers by about 8 points in that final exam for a statistically significant difference in performance. In terms of play style, we divided our students. Now we did sort of some factor analysis and let them group themselves in different ways, let the data group themselves in different ways, and we saw that those who were engaged throughout, now these are folks who log in at least once every 48 hours, compared to people who answered in bursts, log in once every 7 days, to people who are just slightly engaged who log in at greater than 7-day intervals. You can see again the difference in sort of performance. So a statistically significant difference in their final exam performance. So now we know how it is that you can get the most out of this. So imagine the conversations that we can have with our students now is for you to get the most out of this game, you need to play exactly this way, which I've never had as sort of an educator to sort of tell my students. I say, do your assignments or do your homework. I haven't had this level of granularity in their performance, and I've not been able to follow them over time. So other folks have thought of other smart ways to use it. Like over here, Dr. Redden has used it for the rigor, reproducibility, and transparency. Let you talk about that. Oh, I got to give you a mic.
Oh, I have to have a mic.
Got to have a mic. Talk to Brian.
So with rigor and reproducibility and transparency, for those of you, just a refresher, there's an NIH requirement now that for all T, K, and F fellows that they be trained in rigor, reproducibility, and transparency. And so with the CCTS over the past, beginning back in January, we've actually run 2 courses through Kaizen. And the structure of and it's been extremely well reviewed. What we did is we wanted to have something with a little bit more teeth than City. And so what we did is we designed it so on every Sunday night we release a review article on one of the 4 pillars of rigor, reproducibility, and transparency, and tell them that please review this as a review article, and we will post questions on Wednesday with regard to this. And so runs over a 4-week period. The response was actually phenomenal. And when we did kind of like where we sat down with all the individuals, we've actually gathered them in here in the library just to say, hey, can you give us some personal feedback, ways to improve this, what should we do? The game was glowingly reviewed, and one of the things that really blew me away was that a lot of people kept saying to me over and over, based on the game, when we got the article, I went through the article and studied it, trying to anticipate what questions would you write. And almost everyone completed it. We have just finished our second go-round. This time we had 46 individuals across multiple institutions come in. to play this game. I'm analyzing the data right now and have the results. We'll get the information out shortly. We have another one launching, when's our next?
June 19th.
The next one launches on June 19th. Do you mean to go on and tell them what I did with biostats?
Yeah.
Okay, we also brought this into the honors biostats class. I did not break them up into teams for this. I felt like this would be a great way to encourage them to study more and review. Just review the notes as soon as I'd finished the lecture. And you have to, for any game, there has to be an incentive. So the incentive I chose for this class is if you won the game, if you were within the top 5, there were 50 students in the honors class. If you won the game or if you came in the top 5, you were out of the final. And you would have thought I had thrown meat into a shark tank. I mean, everybody came in to play that game. And it was the best reviewed part of the class. Everybody said that it was an essential piece to their learning, and they greatly enjoyed it.
Wow. Let me allow Penny to tell us a little bit about it, because Penny's done something pretty unique and interesting as well.
So we've used
Okay, Brian, I've got it.
So we've used Kaizen with our research coordinator training program, which is a program that we put on twice a year. The whole program itself is about 26 hours long over a 7-week period with lots of time. And we started using Kaizen probably 2 years ago, whereby we used it, we usually had about 40 people in the class. We would assign teams, and we'd have a question. So the classes were once a week. So we would have a question. Questions would be generated before the class and then after the class to, again, get them interested in the topics that were going to be presented, and then just, review the topics afterwards to make sure that they captured the information we wanted them to get. And we did that through every week for the 7-week period, I guess it was. Very much, the teams really liked it. One of the things we also do with this program is we do a pre and a post test, and we wanted to see how that again, did we impact the results? One of the things that happened the first year is we usually do the pre and post test with no names because we just want to know if we've taught them anything. Well, now we needed to associate that with their names, and so we did that this last session, which ended about a month ago, I guess. Mm-hmm. And I have to tell you, Cindy hasn't told me the results, so I don't have any answer to give you as to whether it made a difference in their test scores. They really enjoy it, though. They're really engaged. We have a really good response rate from the group. And it's hard to imagine it's not making a difference in their learning. We used it with the CITP also, the Clinical Investigator Program. Mansour Sali kind of pulled this together, and James participated, and so that was a course that went over 8 weeks, with every other week being 4 hours with 15 investigators. Again, same principle, reinforcing what we were teaching them. So
thank you.
You're welcome.
So I think, this provides a motivational framework. There's many approaches to enhance the engagement of your students. We really think that, to look, when you start analyzing your data and you start figuring out how people played, it gives you all of these insights in this sort of perspective of education analytics that really helps you uncover strategies for how can I most effectively get my students to engage, to retain this knowledge, and to maximize their performance. And I love having these data, and I love being able to think about our students that way and being able to target my teaching in a way that I've hadn't had before. Now, here lately to close, we have another version of this coming. We've been working on it. Brian has been an integral part of that, and some other folks. And I'll give you a sneak peek. These are sort of some rough drawings of some of the functionality that's coming for the fall. So we're redoing sort of our navigation for game managers, where you can sort of create a new game, and then you'll sort of create sort of the parameters for your game. You'll have a history of all the games that you've had. That's important because now you'll be able to, within featured games, every game when you create one will have a last question put in, and that will give you, that question will be sort of how much you learned in this game, and that'll be 1 out of 5 brains. So what is the brain score for this game in terms of how much you gave? So with each game, I'll be able to see, here's R2T, here's the game, here's the author, where it's university it's from, and this is sort of the brain score for it. I can click to see the details of how that game was set up, or I can export that game, where I take all of those questions and that badge structure, and I plug it into as the shell of the game that I'm building now. So now we'll be able to share each other's games, because right now we all have to do this de novo. But now I can be sitting here. We've had calls with people from University of Texas Southwestern and with Michigan, and they're very interested in the type of work that Penny and Dave are doing with sort of research training, with R2T and with clinical investigator and research coordinator training. So now if we have a community of people who are sharing questions and they have their games, then they can literally sort of just borrow their shells and work from there and decrease the workload for them, as all the questions are in the library. Our badges, we're going to expand them with 3 ways. There's going to be team badges. There's going to be a team badge for participation, so team participation, and there's going to be a team accuracy badge. So another way to sort of get people to work around their teams. We also have this sort of this boss badge, and let me tell you what the concept is here. So like in a video game, when you get to the end of a level, there's a boss. Here at the end of your game or wherever you want, you can say, after this many questions, I want there to be a boss. And I want this boss to have 3 points. You're going to take away a point every time you get a question correct. So how much time am I going to give this? I'm going to make this a 5-question boss, and I'm going to give you 200 seconds to do them in. So all of a sudden, you'll get to this point and you'll see a graphic, an introductory image. Our sort of prototype for this is you'll see Blaze, and it'll say, you know, can you defeat Blaze? Blaze the dragon, our UAB mascot. And then you'll sort of say, you'll launch into it. A timer will start going off on the right-hand corner of the screen. And you're going to have 5 questions that you got to get at least 3 right. If you get 3 right and you beat Blaze, then we're going to show you an image of Blaze maybe running from you, saying you've conquered Blaze, and we're going to give you 20 points. But if Blaze beats you, he might sort of, there'll be a different graphic that comes up with Blaze maybe pointing and giggling at you, and he might take away 10 of your points. So this will be an interesting sort of a risk-reward sort of end-of-game event that we'll be adding to this. So those are some things that we have coming in the fall. This was sort of the key to all the little doodles that you saw along the way. And I love this Dairy Queen in Maryland. Think about this every day driving home. They got a new Dairy Queen on Oxmoor. And I think if you have any questions, we have a ton of people that are very experienced with this. Here's some of them. And just please let us know. If you want to use this, let us know. We'll be happy to give you a set of keys. We'll be happy to help you and have you run your game. And we're going to have a better version of this in an app out in the fall. So it'll be even better then. Thank you.
There's plenty of time for questions and suggestions, perhaps for additional games.
Actually, I saw Kathy more than a year ago. She showed me the game. I got excited, and she sent me the link, and that link, somehow I couldn't get it to work, and I just dropped there until through CCTS, the second round, I took the rigor and the rigor and reproducibility, which was really good. And I got excited for my students. I teach economics, healthcare economics, and with my colleague, we'll be developing healthcare finance course. And we're very much interested in adopting for this School of Health Professions. Obviously, we are representing them now. But I have several questions. I had questions, and I really would like you to kind of answer those. One is FERPA. How you kind of mentioned a little bit, if students use their real name, obviously they are given choice to use alias, but if they use their real name, is there a problem with that? That is my first question. Second question, is it possible to link Kaizen to our existing like Canvas or something system that we are using? That's my second question. As far as incentives, you would like students to participate a lot. Obviously, I currently have already some quizzes, readiness assurance quizzes, team-based approach, all those kind of stuff in existing Canvas that I have. And the incentives for them to take is really great. They have to take it because if they don't take, they will get 0. So it's a huge incentive. And I don't want them to hate. I don't want them to remember those quizzes with bad taste, but at the same time, there are trade-offs. I teach economics, obviously. If I don't have enough good incentives, I'm going to miss in undergrad course, I may miss a big chunk of my students. They may not volunteer to answer those questions. How I'm going to get them to do it? What kind of incentives we can incorporate, or should we use grade as an incentive or not? Really, those questions are kind of...
I can tell you that certainly I've seen a lot of incentives used, and I really, when you see things really align is when people use the right incentive for that right audience. A group as diverse as undergraduate students, I'd have to think a little bit more about what incentives could be used, but I'll tell you some incentives that I've seen used that are very effective. Dave's example of an incentive I think is really great. You can be exempted from the final, and it worked in the similar sort of graduate school setting, but I bet you that there's plenty of undergraduates who'd like not to take a final as well. I saw one of my favorite incentive stories is sitting with a bunch of surgeons. You know, they said, let's meet at 6 a.m. And I came in at 6 a.m. to meet with the surgeons, and they'd all been at work, it seemed, for like 3 or 4 hours. So the surgeons have they start early, and they're sitting around the room like this, and they tell them that they want to play a game. And then they tell them, well, in medicine we play for the team that wins, we put their names on this plaque and we keep it in the office, and it's kind of a bragging rights. But the surgeons are unmoved by this. So finally one of the surgeons raises their hand and says, how about if we play that the winning team has one less night of call? And now they start perking up. And then she says, but the winning team chooses which of the other teams will do the call for them. And then she looks at all of them around the room to let them know that they're going to work for her. And man, they all locked in. Every one of them was for sure not going to do that extra call, and they were going to make that guy over there work that shift for them. And that worked. The surgeons, you couldn't get them off. They would be playing all day. So it's just getting the right incentive. You know, for the medicine people, usually you say that, and the medicine people just they want to hug you and talk about your family. We're very, I felt very uncomfortable when I saw that going down. Mostly I would say like, can I do call for you? You have a lot going on. But the surgeons were like, yes, I will crush you. It worked. They played like crazy. So I think incentives like what Dave is saying is probably the way to go.
I've got 2 more points.
Okay.
The 2 other things that another incentive because the other thing is in that honors class for the undergraduates as we were going forward. This is probably being recorded, but I accidentally leveled a very hard midterm against them, so a lot of them got very nervous. And so to calm the situation down and to allow them to be able to continue, in another incentive with regard to enrolling and doing the Kaizen game for the honors class is I said, all right, at the end of the game, there's going to be 300 total points available. If you beat the clock, if you answer all the questions, the max score across the game is 300. So at the end of the day, whatever your grand total is, I'll divide that by 100, and that is your scale factor. So going into the final, you would know that I would shift. If you have you've got 200 points, then you have the ability, if you hit the 88, you're actually going to make the A. And that brought another wave into that game and really increased the rate of participation. And a lot of people were very incentivized by that. The other point I needed to make, going back to the R2T, which is really cool about it, is that we have been able to, because this is a mandatory training, we're going to need to be able to demonstrate this training with the T32s, with regard to progress reports for Fs and K awards, and we were able to link that into the learning management system at UAB. So it's a documented training, and they have accepted the Kaizen training as the documentation, and it's recorded centrally.
I have one suggestion about actually last night.
Okay.
Whatever.
No, go ahead.
After Nancy, you're going to say something. I think. Suggestions.
Yeah, one of the things that we found, we actually have had some focus groups with the undergraduate students, okay, and so they've told us what motivated them. And one of the things that we found is that word got out, actually I think Dr. Roach hinted that they might see some of those questions on their exam They might see some of the same questions, and they actually did. And then, of course, word spread, hey, if you'd played Kaizen, you would have known the answer to this, that, and the other. And so it's sort of that, I don't know, almost a treasure hunt mentality. You know, if you play, there might be a question that's going to be on your exam, that kind of thing. So they said that that motivated them. We also, I mean, it depends on your audience, but Dr. Roach has, one of her incentives is a fun with faculty party. And believe it or not, that's what they want to win. They want to go play with the faculty and have fun. And they have a great big party with food, and nobody else gets to come. So, you know, I mean, you've got to think about who your audience is, you know. It's like, that's a form of bragging rights. And then the other thing I wanted to say, I'm not a FERPA expert. I don't know that anybody ever wants to call themselves a FERPA expert. But to answer your FERPA question, one of the things that we've learned is that FERPA really got serious when we wanted to do research based on our Kaizen games. And that's when we had a lot of talks with IRB and had to come up with consent form because we had to have the students consent to, even though we have access to their records as their instructors, we cannot use that information without their consent. And even though it's aggregated and everything else, we still have to have their consent to do any kind of thing with Kaizen data and their scores on exams. But as far as playing the game, if you think about it in any live classroom, I mean, students know each other's names. So, and they have that opportunity to change to an alias, and if they choose not to do that, then they're adults. So.
Relates to that incentive. When you use that incentive, that may create a problem. Like some questions might come in the midterm exam. That may cause some problems for the FERPA. I'm thinking that there's a possibility. But if you say students, yes, some of those questions from Kaizen is going to be in your midterm, they're like kind of forced to, in a way.
Okay. Just like giving reading. You know, you can read or you cannot read. Okay. Yeah, maybe I'm thinking so deeply about this.
So correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think we've had any games that we've said were forced. We've never said that any games were forced, and we do this at the undergraduate level and at the graduate level. The undergraduate level is kind of one animal, and the graduate level, because our courses are distance successful, is another kind of different thing. But it's always voluntary. It's always just extra ways for them to learn. They don't have to do it. And it's just, the incentive is you might see it again. Just like if you were to say, look at the review questions in the chapter, you might see those again. It's the same idea.
Could you give the microphone to Carol?
Sure. One of the things we do is collect, we do get consent on orientation day for every income.
And also, I'm usually the one who gets consent because I'm not teaching them and Dr. Roach is, and it needs to be someone who's not teaching them who gets the consent. We also learn that.
Okay, so speaking to the forced or not forced, the rigor and reproducibility is going to be a requirement. What's the institutional option to the game? I mean, is it the game or? It's the game.
No, any individual T32 can create their own course if they choose.
That would be me.
And then there is the option for that T32 director to convince the review committee that there's something special there. It's a choice. Here you have an option that's already made. There are data available, but it's a choice.
So another question you may have an opinion about, for a renewal that is going in, a competing renewal in September, would you recommend current trainees
Yes, I would.
before the renewal?
And that's why we're running it almost every 4 weeks.
Okay. Thank you. We'll be in.
I realized that was a very practical question to ask.
Yes.
David.
So, James, are the analytical tools built into the software, or do you dump data out of it into some other system to analyze?
At this point, it's mostly the latter. So we sit down and we talk to the Dave Reddins of the world and the Andy Westfalls of the world and say, and our colleague in nursing, Andres Suero, and basically we figure out new ways to analyze data.
So we're at the top of the hour, and what I would like to do is say to James for taking us through this adventure, and for all of you who have participated in the discussion, thank you very much.
Thank you.